Which was the best rugby competition to watch in 2022, folks? We're going to look at 3 of them. Obviously, there's more than 3 competitions in the world. We're going to look at Super Rugby, the URC, and the Premiership, and talk about a few factors which may make them more interesting or not to watch, like how many games were close, blowouts, the number of tries, was the competition predictable, is it an easy competition to access or is it very expensive? And you guys can let me know your thoughts. I'll try to remember to put timestamps in so you guys can skip to whatever parts, because I will firstly say, as I mentioned, there's other competitions. The top 14 in France is seemingly one of the more entertaining competitions to watch in the world as well. There seems to be a lot of different champions every year, a lot of exciting games, but I don't really watch it, so I don't feel really in the right place to comment about that competition personally. There's a competition in America called the MLR. There's a South American one, the SLAR. There's the Japanese League One. So there's plenty of other competitions around the world, but the 3 we're going to look at are these 3, Super Rugby, URC, and Premiership. And I should say, as a factor, you've got to remember with the Premiership and the URC, a lot of these teams, or pretty much all these teams, are juggling 2 competitions throughout the year. So they've also got European Cup competitions to enter as well. So those competitions have a direct impact on their kind of league games as well. Anyway, let's have a quick overview of the competitions. If you're into this, feel free to skip ahead. 12-team Super Rugby, largely New Zealand and Australia, with plus a couple of Pacific teams. The URC, South Africans and Irish and Welsh, and Italians and Scots. And I don't think I forgot anyone, did I? And the Premiership is all English teams. There's 13. They usually have relegation, but they didn't have it in 2021-2022. How are the competitions staged? Well, if you want pure number of games, the Premiership is your competition, 156 regular season games, plus semi-finals and a final. So it's only the best of the best that make it in the Premiership. There's no quarterfinals. It's straight to semis. Only the top 4 teams make it. And the final is a showpiece event at Twickenham. So it's a proper... You can do that because it's in one country, right? And the country is not... England's not a massive place. I'm pretty sure everyone traveling to London, it's not like flying from, I don't know, Cape Town to Durban kind of thing. The URC, 144 regular season games, plus quarterfinals, semi-finals, and finals. So half the teams make the playoffs with the quarterfinals, and then the final is hosted, and all these games are hosted by whoever the highest qualifier was. So final was in Cape Town because the Stormers were the highest qualifying finalist. Super Rugby, 84 games, so the smallest of the 3 competitions in terms of number of games. 8 teams make the knockout stages out of 12 teams, so only 4 teams don't make it. More teams make it than don't, so it's the opposite of the Premiership, which does mean a little bit. You know, you got one team in 8th spot with a 4-win, 10-loss record making the knockout stages. Is a bit of a joke, personally, I think. But, yeah, same deal. Highest placed team hosts the game. So the final is hosted by whoever is the highest placed team in the final. I should say, in terms of pure format, my preference would be the Premiership because everyone plays everyone once at home, once away. Pretty straightforward. Like anyone can kind of follow that kind of concept. It does mean you have a lot of games though, and these games play throughout the international season as well. So when the Six Nations is on, the Premiership goes on, but with all their big guns kind of out with their international teams. So you do get games where it's kind of not quite second string lineups, but a lot of the main guys are out of their team. So you could look at that as a positive or a negative, depending on how you want the competition to go. The URC, their competition format's a little bit more complicated because they've got conferences where you play your own conference teams more, but you still play every other team. There's no team you don't play. You'll just play some teams out of your conference only once a season. Super Rugby was kind of similar, their format. Aussie teams played Aussie teams more, Kiwi teams played Kiwi teams more, but you still play everybody at least once. So there you go. That's the basic structure of the competition, and we're already 4 minutes in. How about the nuts and bolts of the actual competitions, though? Like, how many of the games are close? Which competition, if you were a neutral, like obviously you guys have all got a team that you follow, but if you were legit looking for a competition to follow, and the main thing you wanted to know was, I want a competition with lots of close games, well, the Premiership is your competition because 46% of the games finish 7 points or less, which I think is actually a pretty good selling point. Like, I like to watch games which have me on the edge of my seat. So yeah, the Premiership is certainly your number one in that regard. Super Rugby would be your second one with 41% of the games finishing within 7 points or less. And then the URC is the last one down at 36. So not as many of the games being close. The URC does seem to be one that's affected maybe a bit more by the home and away thing than other competitions. Like the home teams won 68% of the games in the URC, which is far and away the highest of the three competitions, like 62% in the Premiership and 55% in Super Rugby. So home advantage in the URC was a really massive factor. So yeah, close games. The Premiership is your number one. But then on the flip side, how many of these games are blowouts? And I'm calling a blowout any game that was finished with a more than a 21-point margin. Like 21 points, that's still 3 scores. Like every now and again you see that overturned. Not very often. But if it was more than 3 scores, if it's a 4-score game, that's an absolute hiding, right? So, yeah, the best one in that regard is again the Premiership, actually. Like if you're looking at the lowest amount of blowouts being a positive factor, which I consider it to be, then the Premiership is also the best. Like it's the tightest competition. Super Rugby has 24%, so almost a quarter of the games are decided by more than 3 scores. And then the URC is a wee bit higher with 27%. So 1 in 5, 1 in 4, not much higher with the URC. So they're all in the 20s. But yeah, overall the Premiership scores pretty well in games not being too blown out and being relatively close. So I got that impression. Like I thought it would be that before I ran these numbers, because genuinely the Premiership has been a pretty close competition all year. There's been a few upsets, which is, personally, I find it kind of pleasing. Obviously, if it's your own team, you'd rather it be a blowout than a close game. But yeah, just gut feeling was that it would be the Premiership, and that's actually how it turned out. Interestingly, though, both of their semi-finals were kind of, not close games at all. Super Rugby's finals, for the most part, also didn't really have any close games. None of the quarterfinals were decided by 7 points or less. Only one of the semi-finals and the final was a pretty easy victory for the Crusaders. Whereas the URC, despite these numbers, actually had a really interesting final series with one of the quarterfinals being a close game, both of the semi-finals being a close game, and the final being a close game. So despite the fact that the URC maybe has a few teams who are kind of easy beats towards the bottom of the table, their finals proved that the top teams, when they're putting out their strongest teams, yeah, that there's a fair bit of parity there, which is kind of pleasing. If you just want pure number of tries per game, then Super Rugby is your competition with 7 tries a game in Super Rugby. So yeah, that again goes with the stereotype. Well, the Premiership is not too far behind with 6.8 and then 6 for the URC. So if pure tries, Super Rugby. Like I said, the stereotype is that Super Rugby kind of lacks on defending, and maybe sometimes the numbers kind of back that up. Now, what about how predictable is the competition, and how do you measure how predictable a competition is? Well, at the start of the season, I went and had a look at what were the bookies' odds, like how did the bookies rate the teams for winning these competitions? Did they get things right, or were the bookies dead wrong? Well, I can say the bookies predicted in Super Rugby, they predicted 3 out of the 4 top teams correctly, and they predicted the final winner. They predicted the Crusaders to be the favourite, and the Crusaders won it. So kind of like, oh, the Crusaders won Super Rugby. Like, surprise, surprise. Said nobody, right? For the URC, they also predicted 3 out of the 4 top teams, but they sure didn't pick the winner. They really didn't pick the winner. The Stormers, who ended up winning the competition, by my calculation, were given about a 2% chance of winning the competition, and they were the ones that won it. Ulster, the Bulls, and Leinster were all favoured to be in the top 4. Munster, who was favoured to be in the top 4, only made the quarters. The Stormers were supposed to be 9th. So the fact that you had an unpredicted team win the competition for mine is a big positive. I mean, if you're a Crusaders fan, for example, you would not care at all the fact that Super Rugby is predictable and your team wins it every year. Someone needs to step up and beat you. But personally, I think it's more interesting when different teams have a chance of winning it. At least the Crusaders win at home for the final. That was a little bit of unpredicted stuff for the Super Rugby one. But what about for the Premiership? they predicted 1 out of 4 teams correctly. They predicted Saracens as the winner, and Saracens were the runner-up. The other teams they predicted to be in the conversation were Exeter, who weren't in the top 4. Like teams who did make the top 4, the ended up winning it was Leicester. They were predicted to be 8th. Harlequins, who were in the top 4, were predicted to be 5th, and Northampton were predicted to be 6th. So yeah, in terms of you don't know who's going to win, close games. The Premiership certainly looking like a pretty good league to play in. The last one I'm going to talk about is access, and I will mention, like, sometimes VPNs can be your friend with rugby. You guys have seen my videos before. You know I use Express, and I'll put a link down to Express in the description because they are an affiliate of the channel. Quite happily, it's a service I can recommend because I use it because so much rugby stuff is geo-blocked. But like even on Twitter, like sometimes you'll be scrolling through and it's like, look at this great try, and if it's from the Premiership, I can't watch it in New Zealand because it's geo-blocked in my area, so I have to put the VPN onto the UK to be able to watch it, kind of thing. That kind of stuff grinds my gears. I wish they wouldn't do that. But yeah, access. How easy are these competitions to access? I would say Super Rugby. It depends where you live. It's hard for me to kind of write it down, so I'll just explain it. It's Sky in New Zealand, and it's all paid. You're not going to get nothing for free. Maybe, I think Prime, who's one of our free-to-air channels, will put a game on delayed. But no online options for free games in New Zealand. Stan, who's the Australian rights holder, they show one of the Aussie games a week free-to-air on Channel 9. But for the most part, access, I mean, would you call it hard? You're basically going to have to pay. It's all behind the paywall. There's no real free options for Super Rugby, so we can just put it down as kind of hard. Like you're going to have to part with some cash if you want to watch Super Rugby. URC, I'm going to say it's a bit of a mix because, again, it depends where you live. If you're in South Africa, everything's on Super Sport as far as I'm aware. If you are elsewhere, like if you're in the UK, you can get some of the games on S4C for free, which is in Welsh, but you can still watch the games. And this is, again, where VPN comes in. I watched loads of games in Welsh this year on S4C by VPNing into the BBC. They also put some of the games on BBC Two, I think. So those ones will be in English. So you can legit get some of the games for free, which is, I think, helpful for growing the game. But as I said, not in South Africa. I think the Scots have to pay. Their games are all on Premier Sports. I think the Italians also have to pay. Is it Sky? I forget which broadcaster has it in Italy. Ireland, though, also has a mixture because some of their games are on TG4, which is their Irish language channel, which, again, I've watched loads of games for free using their website, and some of the games are on RTE in English. So me, here in New Zealand, VPN, I watched a bunch of URC content this year on their free sites. So you could legitimately, if you had a VPN, not spend any money and watch a handful of URC games every week. You'd be hard-pressed to find the South African games, the Italian games, and the Scottish games, though, unless they were playing a Welsh or Irish team, because it's only the Irish and Welsh teams that will be up for free. And the Premiership, I will also say, like, if you're happy with delayed, it's fantastic, because their games are on BT Sports, which is paid. And the games which aren't being put on BT Sports are on their own in-house broadcaster, which is paid. But if you're happy to watch delayed, and I think like the next day, they put all of the games up for free on their website, like the next day. So if you're happy to wait 24 hours, which not all sports fans are, because if you get spoiled to the result, that kind of sucks. But if you can avoid the results, you can stream all their games for free. Again, VPNs are very handy when watching the Premiership. So it's a mixture. You have to pay if you want it live, but if you're happy to wait, they do it all on their website, which is phenomenal, personally, I think. So it is a bit of a mixed bag. So there you go, folks. That's a 14-minute look at these 3 competitions. I think the Premiership comes out looking pretty good. As I said, you do have to remember that in the URC, sometimes teams sent away from home are not always their strongest teams, with teams being kind of held back to play in Europe. And the Premiership, sometimes not always the strongest teams playing when the international guys are out with the Six Nations. Super Rugby, you're generally seeing the strongest teams out every week because they don't have anything else. They don't have internationals getting in the way, and they don't have a cup competition to compete in at the same time. So, yeah, they've all got their own strengths and weaknesses. As I said, if you've got your own team, you will follow your own team. That kind of goes without saying. Sometimes it'll just be a time zone factor. Like I know guys in the States and Canada, like some of the Super Rugby games are on at horrendous hours, but games in Europe may be on at a bit of a better time. It just really depends. But yeah, I hope that was a kind of interesting look. Some of the stereotypes are kind of true. And sometimes it just depends on which end of the season you look at. Like the URC having the least close games, but the closest final series. So yeah, it is really a mixed bag. You guys let me know your thoughts, and yes, I will talk to you guys again soon. See you later.